Hey, this is Travis Shaw with the Virginia Piedmont Heritage Area, coming to you today from right along what is now modern Route 50. So pardon any road noise you might get. Of course, historically, this road was known as the Ashby's Gap Turnpike through the 19th and early 20th century. A very important historical thoroughfare through the Piedmont region of Virginia. And I'm standing in front of one of the more noticeable landmarks that you might see if you're traveling along Route 50 between the villages of Upperville and Paris, and that is what was known until recently as the Blackthorn Inn. Up until very recently, it was a historic inn and tavern, a great place to go for a meal. But in the 18th and 19th centuries, it would have been part of a historic farm known as Greystone Farm. Greystone has its roots in the 18th century as part of that massive land grant that was owned by Lord Fairfax, covering much of northern Virginia. The house that you see, kind of the historic core, this stone part of the house, was built at that time, built right around 1763. And about 10 years after this home is built, this property is actually going to be acquired by none other than George Washington. Washington is going to acquire about 2,700 acres here along the Ashby's Gap Road, kind of in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains. He's going to acquire it through his connections to Lord Fairfax. And, you know, it's going to be just a small portion of tens of thousands of acres that he owns out here in Western Virginia. So, you know, as I said, portion of this land owned by George Washington, but that is not the only historical connection that this stone farmhouse has. You know, this farmhouse, being here for over 2.5 centuries, has been witness to a lot of the important events that have occurred right here in the Virginia Piedmont. If you think back a few weeks, you might remember Ian and I were out in the village of Paris talking about the British prisoners of war that were marched up through the area after the Battle of Yorktown. This stone farmhouse would have been witness to that. This house would have been here as those prisoners are marching out westward through Ashby's Gap. It's going to be here in the early 19th century when the Ashby's Gap Turnpike is established. So all of the settlers and traffic and commerce that's being carried along that turnpike. And of course, it's going to be here during the American Civil War. Now, in November of 1862, in the wake of the Battle of Antietam, you have the Army of the Potomac under the command of General McClellan moving south through the Loudoun Valley, trying to get the drop on Lee, trying to get between Lee and the Confederate capital at Richmond. And in response, Jeb Stuart's Confederate cavalry is going to be fighting a series of desperate holding actions. Desperate holding actions here in the Loudoun Valley. We refer to it as the Battle of Unison, but in reality it's going to be a series of small actions over the course of early November that are going to culminate right here just outside of the village of Upperville. The Confederates are going to make kind of their last stand as they're moving westward along the turnpike and towards the gap. And then less than a year later, you're going to see a repeat of these same actions. Again, it's Jeb Stuart and his cavalry that are trying to get between the Army of the Potomac and Lee's army. Now, in the summer of 1863, the situation's a little different. Lee and his army are west of the Blue Ridge, moving north on their second invasion of Maryland that's going to eventually culminate in Pennsylvania at the Battle of Gettysburg. But again, Jeb Stuart and his men are going to fight a series of delaying actions at Aldie, Middleburg, and Upperville, trying to keep the Union Army from getting over these passes. So in both the 1862 Unison campaign and the 1863 campaign here in the Loudoun Valley, that action is going to kind of culminate, is going to end with fighting in and around this area. And it's for that reason that this home was placed in the Unison Battlefield Historic District. So a nationally recognized historic district. And we're kind of at the very western tip of that here at what was Greystone Farm. Now, as you can see, Greystone Farm has undergone a lot of additions over the year, a lot of 20th century additions, but the historic fabric of that originally 1763 farmhouse is still very much intact, and that's due in large part to the community action out here. You know, through the years, the preservation community here in northern Fauquier County, southern Loudoun County, has rallied to really keep the historic core of this beautiful 18th century farmhouse intact. And so even today it stands as one of the more unique and one of the best preserved examples of 18th century architecture. 18th century architecture here along the historic Ashby's Gap Turnpike, and that's something that, you know, the preservation community is very proud of to this day. So next time you're driving out along Route 50, you're between Upperville and Paris, you know, take a look at the old Greystone, the old Blackthorn Inn, and, you know, think back to all the thousands and thousands of fascinating people, historical events that have occurred right in its backyard. So again, thank you for joining me. I'm Travis Shaw with the Virginia Piedmont Heritage Area. We'll see you again soon.